Hello friends and enemies, my name's Jocelyn and we're here to talk about books. Specifically, the books that I read in the month of May. This is going to be part 1 of 2 videos, and I've read a fair number of books this month, mostly because I was on vacation for the first 3 weeks of the month, and I was able to fit in a lot of reading, luckily. Don't expect this to continue, because it won't. Okay, so let's get into it. The first book I read in the month was The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry. This book has been making the rounds of BookTube in general, but I think at this point it's only out in the UK. I think it's coming out in Canada in June. I luckily got this copy, which is the UK edition, from a used bookstore, and I read it and really enjoyed it. It's about a young woman named Cora who goes to the countryside in Essex because she hears reports of some sort of mythical serpent terrorizing villagers there, and she has a scientific bent and she wants to figure out what's going on. And it's about a friendship that develops between her and a priest living in the area who is also dealing with the serpent and its effect on his parishioners. So it was a really enjoyable book. I would say that sometimes the writing style was a bit overwrought, but the concept and the characters were good enough that I would still strongly recommend it. The second book, which I read in the month, which I had to return to the library, so I don't have here, was Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. I heard about this book because another book by the author, Hannah Kent, has come out recently or is coming out soon, I'm not quite sure which. So the book Burial Rites is about a young woman in Iceland in the early 1800s who is preparing for execution because she's been accused of murder. So throughout the book we learn more about who she is and also the family who she's staying with prior to her execution. I thought it was a decent concept, but I felt like the writing and the characterization weren't really strong enough to win me over, so it was a solid book, maybe a 3 out of 5 stars. So the next book that I read was a poetry collection, which I also returned to the library, and that was Glossolalia by the poet Marita Dachsel. I think she's a Canadian poet, and this was such a good poetry collection. So it was basically portraying the perspectives of a whole bunch of women who were married to one of the founding fathers of the Mormon faith, and they were engaging in polygamy. There were dozens and dozens of these wives, and each of the poems portrays the perspective of one of them and sort of goes into their reasons for joining this polygamous cult and the relationships between all the different wives. And it's an interesting concept, but also really well executed. Marita Dachsel plays with form so well and gives all of the different women portrayed throughout the collection a really strong voice. So I would highly recommend that. It also has a beautiful cover. So the next thing I read after that was the play Wit by the playwright Margaret Edson. I think Wit was Edson's only play, and I heard about this play on the podcast Overdue, which is a great book podcast. They gave a summary of it, and I thought it sounded so intriguing that I went and got it from the library. Basically, it's about a woman in her 50s who's a scholar of the poet John Donne, and she has terminal cancer, and while she's experiencing the last months of her life, she's thinking about her life and her work and her relationship with poetry and with the people who she's met throughout her career. And she's sort of struggling with the concept of mortality, which is something that John Donne also goes into a lot. So it was an interesting relationship there. Next, after that, I read Poor Things by Alistair Gray. And this is a book that I saw on Jen Campbell's channel, and I thought the concept sounded so interesting. I happened upon it in a local used bookstore, so I decided to pick it up. Basically, it's sort of a Frankenstein retelling about a couple of young medical students, and one finds a drowned woman and decides to replace her brain, which is dead, with the alive brain of the baby who is in her stomach. and it's just very disturbing and goes on from there through the two young doctors' relationships with this young woman and with her development as she sort of matures as a child within an adult's body. It's a really interesting and well written, and also has mixed media, which is something I'm always a big fan of. Like, there are engravings, sort of illustrations like this one here. There are passages that are supposed to be in different handwriting. There are maps. Here, I'll try to find some of them. Here's a passage that's supposed to be in the young woman's handwriting. Here are some supposed primary source documents. And the author, Alistair Gray, combines all these different forms to give a really interesting picture of this woman's life and the disturbing nature of her relationships with the two men. I would say that it wasn't a book that captivated me fully. Maybe it would have if I'd read Frankenstein already, but I haven't. So I think I should read Frankenstein and revisit this, because I think there's a lot here to offer. But I think this is probably a 4-star book. The next book that I read was We Need New Names by NoViolet Bulawayo. And this is a book about a young woman growing up in Zimbabwe, I think. Yes, it's about a young girl named Darling growing up in Zimbabwe, and she and her friends navigating the town where they live. They're in a condition of extreme poverty. It's all very bleak, and there are hints of corruption and violence within the country. And eventually, Darling moves to the United States. It's not a spoiler because it's stated pretty explicitly in the blurb, the book also deals with her navigating her new environment in the United States and her disconnection with her home and her loss of culture. I really enjoyed this. There were some really well-written sections. It sort of flips between Darling's perspective and the sort of collective perspective of, I guess, African immigrants or Zimbabwean immigrants, and it's a really good effect. The second last book I'm going to talk about in this video is The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson, and I think this is a book that's been sort of making the rounds of BookTube for the past few years. Essentially, it's a sort of memoir about Maggie Nelson's relationship with her partner, and her partner is gender fluid, and it's also a theoretical exploration of love and of gender and of family, with reference to a lot of different gender theorists. Gender theory is something I've been studying a bit more recently, so it's something that is intriguing to me. So this was a good choice, but if you're looking for something easily digestible, this isn't really a good option for you, because it's very theoretical, which is something I loved, and I think she incorporated it very well. But just a heads up. Also, it has a fair amount of explicit sexual content, so if that's not really your style, I would stay away from this one. But if you're interested in gender theory at all, and especially as it pertains to the queer community, this is a great choice. The last book I read in the first half of the month was How to Be Both by Ali Smith. And this is a book told in two perspectives, and I'm pretty sure that there are different editions in which the two perspectives are presented in a different order. So in the edition I have here, the section that labeled with the camera, which is George's perspective, was first, and then the section with the eye, which I'll try to show you, was presented second. So here is that, and essentially this book revolves around art and a discussion of perspective. So George, who is the protagonist in the first section of the book, has just lost her mother, and her mother was obsessed with this one specific painting, and the painting was by the narrator of the second half of the book. So it deals with their perspectives and the secrets that both of them have. And it also deals with things related to sexism, gender, queer relationships, And I found the second half especially intriguing because it's sort of written in a prose poetry style, which is something I find really appealing. But both halves were well written, but I didn't find the characters really grab me all that much. I felt like there was some distance there, which might have been intentional, but it made the reading experience a bit trickier. So those were the books I read in the first half of May. If you read any of them, please let me know so we can discuss below, and I should have my second half of May wrap up around here soon. So thanks very much for watching. Bye.